summer of 1980, I made my first movie. It was a stop-motion animated Star Wars movie, made with action figures in my backyard sandbox. It was crude and slapdash as any stop-motion animated film made by a 7-year-old might be, but it was something driven by my passion for storytelling and for George Lucas's galaxy far, far away. The Empire Strikes Back had premiered that May, and the marketing blitz had begun months before. There were TV spots, magazine covers from Starlog and Cinefantastique. There was a Marvel Comics adaptation in digest form my mom surprised me with. I had been inspired to make my stop-motion film because of a Making of Empire Strikes Back documentary aired on TV detailing the intricate stop-motion effects Phil Tippett had utilized to make those massive hulking AT-ATs stomp across the frozen tundra of Hoth. After a 3-year drought, Star Wars was back. And if this were any other podcast, I'd spend this episode rhapsodizing about seeing The Empire Strikes Back in 1980. This is not one of those podcasts. If there's one truth in movie making, it's that science fiction was and remains a challenge to produce. You can't just rush it out like you can a horror, action, or exploitation film. Well, technically you can rush it out, but the results will vary, and usually not in a good way. Sci-fi requires you to believe in the world presented, and that's a challenge when you can, in some cases, literally see the wires holding everything together. While Close Encounters of the Third Kind followed George Lucas's Star Wars later in 1977, aside from that, only Ridley Scott's Alien really stood out as far as late 70s sci-fi is concerned. But none of these films were Star Wars. Where was the laser blasts? The adventure, the daring do? The heroes you could cheer? The villains you could boo? Where were the robots? While Battlestar Galactica and Buck Rogers both featured their own unique antagonists, despite their individual charms, neither John Colicos's Baltar nor Pamela Hensley's Princess Ardala held a candle to Darth Vader. The lid had been torn off the pulp sci-fi crate, and in the wake of Battlestar and Buck, we were still waiting for the next Star Wars. And in 1979, the Walt Disney Company promised to bring us just that. This is the story of the black hole.
There is an inexorable force in the cosmos where time and space converge. A place beyond man's vision, but not his reach. It is the most mysterious and awesome point in the universe, where the here and now may be forever.
On my ship, you ask.
The Disney of the 1970s and early 1980s was a much different beast from the multi-billion-dollar conglomerate it is today. After Walt's death in 1966, the company underwent a tumultuous period now dubbed its Dark Age, of diminished box office and lessening cultural influence. Through the 1950s and well into the 1960s, Disney had been king. Yet, contrary to popular belief, Disney's successes were spotty even when Walt was helming the ship. While Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs had been a hit, subsequent films, including classics like Pinocchio, Bambi, Dumbo, Fantasia, Peter Pan, Cinderella, and Sleeping Beauty, had all underperformed or outright flopped at the box office. In fact, at the outbreak of the Second World War, the company was in serious trouble. As it happened, Germany was a big market for Disney at the time until Hitler happened. And it was the US government who saved Disney's hide, contracting the animation studio to produce training and propaganda films for the various armed services. That government cheddar kept the mouse fed, as did continual re-releases of those less than successful films throughout the ensuing decades. The 1950s also helped Disney gain a leg up with the advent of television. Disney embraced the potential of the small screen, producing cheap shows like Zorro, Daniel Boone, and of course the Mickey Mouse Club, that essentially raised the baby boom generation, giving them a default nostalgia for all things Disney. They also dove into live action, crafting family-friendly classics like Treasure Island, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and Mary Poppins, among many others. Then Walt died, and things at the House of Mouse became a lot more interesting. If you're a Gen Xer like me, you'll likely remember the results. Robin Hood, The Rescuers, The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, live-action fare like Pete's Dragon, The Apple Dumpling Gang, Bedknobs and Broomsticks. Fantasies that appealed to the younger set but didn't quite land for the older ones. Those re-releases of the aforementioned classics kept Steamboat Willie afloat, but there are only so many times you can go back to the well. Disney was losing ground to its competitors, and when Star Wars made its considerable cannonball into the pool, Disney efforts like The Apple Dumpling Gang Rides Again and Return to Witch Mountain seemed quaint throwbacks to an earlier era. Disney's Dark Age, though, remains a fascinating period, and I think a tremendously underrated one, because it was during this time that Disney rolled the dice, throwing everything at the wall to see what stuck, and brought us a range of very interesting, sometimes almost experimental films. The Watcher in the Woods, The Devil and Max Devlin, Tron, a flawed but worthwhile adaptation of Ray Bradbury's Something Wicked This Way Comes, and 1979's Christmas-time sci-fi adventure, The Black Hole.
From the Black Hole Collection, it's Vincent.
Look, a black hole in space!
And Captain Dan Holland. It's the Black Hole action figures, each sold separately. You can pretend the evil Dr. Reinhardt and Maximilian want to force Captain Holland and Vincent into the Black Hole.
All clear, Captain.
Other Black Hole action figures sold separately. Maximilian, Captain Holland, Vincent, and all Black Hole action figures sold separately by Mego.
The Black Hole was certainly in the wheelhouse of us 70s kids facing a long drought between Star Wars films, and yet The Black Hole was and remains a truly odd film, by turns childish and horrific, with heroic Robert Forster, Joseph Bottoms, Yvette Mimieux, Ernest Borgnine, and Anthony Perkins, along with cute robots Vincent and Bob, voiced respectively by Roddy McDowall and Slim Pickens, facing off against ferocious red murderbot Maximilian, crazed Dr. Reinhardt, played by another Maximilian, Shell, and his army of stormtrooper-esque robot soldiers. Oh, Dr. Reinhardt also enslaved his crew, turning them into walking corpses beneath monk-like hoods and featureless silver faceplates. Did I mention this is a Disney film? There's gruesome deaths, a trippy voyage through the titular maw, an extended visit to what can only be described as hell, and a whiff of an ending that's actually more confusing than the one for 2001: A Space Odyssey. The Black Hole was vigorously marketed, and audiences starved for more Star Wars did come out, to the tune of $35 million in tickets. Unfortunately, for a film that cost $20 million to produce and at least that much in publicity and marketing, The Black Hole was a loss for an already struggling studio, trying to remain relevant, not to mention solvent, in the long, dark age following Walt's death. The Black Hole was a milestone for me in that it was the first movie I can really remember anticipating. Reading every magazine article, watching every commercial, studying the card backs of every action figure, coloring book, storybook, and activity book. Whereas Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica, and Buck Rogers had all snuck up on me without any fanfare prior to Dad saying he was taking me to a movie, I knew seemingly everything about the Black Hole for what felt like months. It must have been fascinating to be the proverbial fly on the wall during what I'm sure were many story conferences during the production of The Black Hole, just to find out what movie they had tended to make, because the end result felt like 3 films, all of them at war with each other. Movie 1 is the story of a mysterious derelict ship perched at the edge of a hellish vortex in space. The other is an adventure story with cute robots, laser beams, and a scenery-chewing mad scientist. The third is a surreal odyssey through heaven, hell, and beyond. The Black Hole truly feels like one of those movies where they threw random ideas at a wall to see which one stuck, then said, hey, let's use all of them. There are such massive tonal shifts in the film that while one can applaud how swiftly the story kicks into gear, it all feels half-baked. We want to know more about the Palomino's crew and its mission, briefly mentioned as searching for intelligent life somewhere in the galaxy. We want to know more about the universe of the film, just as we want more time exploring the mysterious derelict Cygnus. What was Kate McRae's father's relationship with Reinhardt? What was the deal with her ESP, an element introduced with great fanfare in the beginning but never utilized again? And how does one use ESP to communicate with a robot anyway? Watching The Black Hole through a more seasoned perspective, it's obvious just how much Disney likely forced director Gary Nelson to cut out in order to bring the film down to a tight 98 minutes with credits. Those unanswered questions would eventually lead me to seek out Alan Dean Foster's novelization of The Black Hole years later. And the novelization is eye-opening for any fan of The Black Hole to get a sense of what story was intended to be told. More on that after these messages.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Taking place in the year 2130, just 100 or so years from now, the Palomino's mission 18 months in has been to chart unexplored regions of the galaxy and search for signs of intelligent life. 18 months later, they found nothing and are beginning the long, lonely journey home. Something of a secret romance has developed between McCrae and Captain Holland. Ernest Borgnine's journalist Harry Booth took the assignment in the hope that he'd be the one to break the big story of man's first encounter with an extraterrestrial intelligence. Anthony Perkins' icy scientist Alex Durant is hoping to burnish his credentials. And now they discover the derelict Cygnus at the edge of an enormous black hole, seemingly unaffected by the fierce gravitational forces that nearly suck Palomino and crew into its hungry maw. Only on boarding her, the Palomino crew finds the ship abandoned, a Marie Celeste in space. On finally meeting the Cygnus captain, the brilliant scientist Dr. Hans Reinhardt, and his entirely robotic crew, or so we think, already factions have begun to splinter, with Booth, McCrae, and Durant each wanting to uncover the Cygnus mystery, while Joseph Bottoms, Pizer, Holland, and Vincent are more wary. They know something's amiss here, and it will take some explorations of their own to discover what. But it all pointed to the bigger problem: homework. Having to read the novelization or prequel comic or whatever ancillary materials there are to understand what's going on in a movie means the movie simply does not work. In spite of the film's valiant efforts, the black hole's problems are ultimately incapable of being solved. The novelization, like the movie, just sort of ends. In published form, the survivors of the Palomino rocket into the vortex are discombobulated and merged into a single intelligence by their journey, becoming one consciousness, even Vincent. How that would have translated to the big screen is a mystery, which is probably why the movie just ends with Reinhardt's probe ship bearing the remaining Palomino crew emerging through the other side and making way for an undiscovered planet. I think, though, in the end, so focused was Disney in developing its own answer to Star Wars that it didn't stop to think about whether that question ever needed any sort of answer. Or, to paraphrase Jurassic Park's Ian Malcolm, your development executives were so preoccupied whether they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. Yet, in spite of its flaws, there are many bright spots in the film. Same as Buck Rogers, same as Battlestar Galactica. The first act, with the appearance of the mysterious Cygnus, is suitably spooky. The black hole itself is nightmare-inducing in its appearance, and frankly, on a purely visual level, the look of the black hole runs circles around Star Wars. There's a very tight story economy at work, too. The events detailed once the Palomino crew arrives on Cygnus seems to unfold in a matter of hours, until the Cygnus makes its journey through the titular hole. The performances remain committed, with seasoned vets Forrester, Borgnine, Perkins, and Schell carrying the weight. Praise must also be bestowed on legendary matte painter Peter Ellenshaw, lured out of semi-retirement to contribute to the film's truly impressive special effects. On that front, the black hole pulls off some dazzling set pieces, most notably the burning, glowing asteroid that crashes through Cygnus's hull during the climactic third act, a precursor to that giant boulder that pursues Indiana Jones through the temple at the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark. If the black hole is remembered for anything, it is possibly its fearsome robotic henchman Maximilian and the friendlier robots Vincent and Old Bob. On the surface, it smacks of Disney deciding they needed family-friendly robots like R2-D2 and C-3PO, but so intertwined with Hull's story are these bots that you can't envision the story working without them. The other bright spot in the film is what you heard more than saw: John Barry's epic, rousing score. Familiar to movie fans as the composer of numerous James Bond films, hearing the score through that mental filter feels like we're in a very ominous, very portentous 007 movie. The black hole didn't completely disappear from my memory by the time The Empire Strikes Back arrived in theaters just 6 months later, but it was filed away like a trusted old paperback or movie novelization onto a bookshelf containing dozens more. In years to come, as home video began its slow but steady rise to become part of the fabric of our lives, I would revisit it on Betamax or VHS, or over at whatever Fred had rented, or in the case of the 1990s clamshell widescreen cassette tape, owned a copy. Over those years, I would try and clear my thoughts and watch the film objectively, trying to convince myself that I saw it too young, that I just didn't understand the mind-bending 2001-inspired climactic journey through the hole, that as an older, more seasoned adult, I would be able to unlock the mysteries at the heart of the black hole. But each time, I was just as baffled by what it all meant, before finally surmising it didn't mean anything other than we didn't have an ending. I don't think I truly appreciated what a piece of my childhood the black hole was until near 40 years later, when popping into a Walgreens drugstore to pick up a prescription because time does march on. On my way back from the prescriptions counter, I wandered down their small toy aisle to find a stunning toy replica of Maximilian, so screen accurate in its rendition it could have passed as a model of the fearsome robot. Needless to say, I snapped him up. He was only $20 after all. And I sought out the same company, Diamond Select's, just as precise renditions of Vincent and Old Bob. Opening them up and setting them on display on an office shelf, it truly felt like I had again brought a long-forgotten, long-dismissed piece of childhood home. Flaws and all, I still hold a great deal of affection for the black hole. Same as Battlestar, same as Buck. Just as I do for other flawed but fascinating screen works from Disney's dark age like Tron, Something Wicked This Way Comes, and The Watcher in the Woods. Films fueled by passion in front of and behind the camera, rather than the bog-standard corporate filmmaking we see today. There is one small detail about seeing the black hole that lingers. It came after the movie was over. Dad took my sister to the bathroom. I waited in the lobby by a poster that had captured my attention. It was all black, with what I guess you'd call luscious red lips, and a title, The Rocky Horror Picture Show. I couldn't tell what kind of movie it was. Horror, making me lean closer in that direction. When Dad came back with my sister, I asked him what it was, and he just rolled his eyes and said it was some silly movie. But as we walked to the door, a woman, either in her teens or 20s, must have heard the exchange, because as I passed her, she whispered to me, "It's really fun."
You've seen all kinds of movies, but you've never seen anything like the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
They're probably foreigners with ways different than our own.
I'm just a sweet transvestite.
See the Rocky Horror Picture Show. A different set of jaws. Rated R.
It would be some time, many years, before I would see the Rocky Horror Picture Show in a theater. In that moment, in Toronto's Bloor Cinema, in 1995, as the lights dimmed and the crowd roared, I had a brief flashback to Christmas 1979. That theater in Vancouver, that poster, and that young woman. Splintered memories, like old photographs scattered over a floor. So what was it all for? The Colonial Viper fighters and Cylon Raiders, the Buck Rogers starships, action figures and playsets, consigned to yard sale discounts barely a year after that first movie, joined a couple of years later by Black Hole action figures. In a very real sense, it was the ephemera of these movies, the toys, books, and games that brought much of that childhood joy to us. It was the merchandising, not so much the storylines of Galactica and Rogers, and the impenetrable conclusion of the black hole that fired the imagination. If you were born after the year 2000 or even 1990, you likely will never know the thrill of rounding the corner at the toy department in whatever store mom or dad dragged you to and seeing shelves and racks laden with action figures and vehicles and playsets from that new film or TV show. Adventure beckoned on those pegs and in those rows. It was the headcanon of those worlds that kept them alive, the ones we invented during backyard and basement playtime with friends. The merchandising of these movies and television series continued the narrative beyond the weekly fix and beyond that one-and-done film. A very short-lived comic book spin-off of The Black Hole, published by Gold Key, lasted precisely one issue, which found the crew of the Palomino landing on a planet that was a throwback to medieval times, the era, not the restaurant. A Galactica comic book series from Marvel managed to just outlive its television incarnations, running 23 issues between March of 1979 and January of 1981. But all those adventures were short-lived. By the time Galactica ended and Buck fizzled out, Star Wars had made its return to our galaxy, and we were once again immersed in George Lucas's world. Here was that ongoing story, featuring the return of our familiar cast of characters and some fresh new faces in strange new worlds. The finite spaces of Battlestar, Buck, and Black did not inspire such replay value. What happened to our heroes and villains between Star Wars and Empire? We had the toys to power our imaginations and concoct stories of our own. It was the merchandising of these movies, and many more movies to come, that extended their lives well beyond the last flicker of the TV tube, a uniquely Gen X era, where mass media converged just as we were ourselves coming of age, our ticket to worlds filled with adventure. Which brings us to the end of this episode and the end of this mini trilogy of Killer Bees. Thank you again for tuning in. If you missed my previous looks at Battlestar Galactica and Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, you'll find them on the streaming service of choice and this show page. If you want to know more about Disney's Dark Age, I highly recommend the book Disney in Between, The Lost Years 1966 to 1986 by Stephen Anderson. I received a copy of it for Christmas, and it was very helpful in setting the scene for this fascinating era of film. I'd always mulled the idea of writing a book about this era. Now I don't have to. Speaking of books, I am also mulling a special episode focusing on movie novelizations at some point as well. If you like this idea, sound off to me and I'll gauge interest. Thanks as well for your comments, emails, and feedback on the podcast so far. I'm still getting the hang of it. I'm feeling pretty good about it, though. I'm glad it's resonating with so many of you. You can follow us on Instagram at the Celluloid Heroes Pod and me at bradabraham.com, where I post show notes, video clips, and more. I'll be back next month with a double episodic look at 2 films that made us all believe a man could fly.
And now, folks, it's time to say goodnight. We sincerely appreciate your patronage and hope we've succeeded in bringing you an enjoyable evening of entertainment. Please drive home carefully and come back again soon. Good night.